It always amazes me how many people have P&L responsibility, profit and loss responsibility, and they've never been told how to read one of these statements. When you go to college, you're taught corporate finance. You're not taught Wall Street finance, and those are two different things, two different viewpoints. There's a lot of benefit to ensuring that the employees, not just the private equity principals, go along for the ride.
It's business 101. And unfortunately, average Joe is not taught business 101. They're taught come to work, get their paycheck. Hey, welcome back to the Aerospace Executive Podcast. I am really happy to have with me after a great long Memorial Day weekend, Dr. Kevin Koharki. Kevin is a professor at Purdue University. Advisor to aviation and aerospace companies. It says in the background CAE Investment Advisors, but we're really going to talk about CAE Consulting today and the work he's doing with aviation and aerospace companies throughout the industry. So, Kevin, thanks for coming on.
No, I really appreciate it, Craig. It's my pleasure to be here. Thanks for making the time.
So, let's talk about what you're doing. We had this conversation 2 weeks ago, and it's really fun to listen. So obviously you're a business professor at Purdue. You teach finance. So talk about how the finance industry is now moving more into advisory work for aviation and aerospace companies.
Yeah, it's really interesting the way that it started. So my background, former investment banker, became an accounting PhD, and while I've taught accounting courses, I do a lot of financial statement analysis. So it's really more finance, but to me, in order to teach any of that well, you need to know the accounting. As that gentleman Warren Buffett in Omaha said, if you want to be an investor, you need to know accounting. But 4 years ago, we were approached by the CEO of a major aerospace and defense contractor. They do $80 billion a year in revenue. And he said, he goes, I have brilliant engineers, but they struggle to understand how they add value to the organization. They struggle to, request $50 million for a new jet engine or missile or whatever it is from our CFO. And when we ask what's the return on investment, we tend to get a blank stare. And of course, to an engineer, if something is technically correct, if it's scientifically correct, then we should do it. But obviously in the business world, if we're not going to make any money, then, nobody cares. So I was tasked with fixing that problem. And because I've been an analyst for 25 years, hence, CA investment advising is me showing people how to analyze companies and things like that. I said, let me tailor this. Let me go study your company and figure out what you guys are doing and tailor it. And so piloted it 3 years ago, and it's been fantastic ever since. So end up doing a lot of work with them through CE consulting and stuff like that. I absolutely love it. So then, believe it or not, a neighbor 2 doors down used to be the dean of aerospace engineering at Purdue, and he goes, you should go talk to the folks over at the American Institute of Aeronautics and Astronautics. So I got to meet their C-suite people and have done several presentations for them. I'm doing another one in July, as a matter of fact, at Ascend and Aviation out in Las Vegas. And it's really just about making the industry become more aware of the importance of financial acumen.
It's interesting. I wrote a note down what you're talking about, and I'm a small business guy, and my wife is, strong finance background from a couple of OEMs. And when we talk about our business and come up with the ideas, and this is one thing I don't think is real prevalent in big companies, but when we talk small business, and I say, hey, look, I want to go spend this money on something. Let's talk about it.
Yep.
Her answer back is, what are you going to get back?
Yeah.
What's the answer? And if I don't have a good answer, we talk about it a little bit more. And the answer is yes, no, or let's figure it out. And I don't think this is a question that a lot of companies ask their employees on any given Sunday.
I think you're right. And part of it's just lack of training. I mean, so I've literally trained law firms, I've trained sales teams, HR professionals. I mean, it doesn't matter. But what people need to realize is at the end of the day, the goal of any organization is to take a dollar bill of revenue that it generates, reinvest it back in the business, and generate more than a dollar in the future, right? And there's some minimum rate of return that we need to get. And most people don't get this training. And I could say this as a professor who's been teaching accounting and finance students for 17 years. I'm not sure that they understand it that well either. And so there's this gap in just basic learning about what the C-suite is trying to accomplish. And the way that this gets funneled down through organizations, it's just not taught very well. And so it is a struggle to find people who can teach it well. And so you need to know the business, you need to know accounting, you need to know finance, but you also have to have a skill of delivering it to people who have never seen this before and deliver it quickly and to the point and make them understand it that fast. I mean, because we don't, when I'm on site with a client, I don't have a semester to teach them. I have a couple of days.
Is there a basic lack of financial acumen? What is a lack of financial acumen a pervasive problem in law
Yes.
firms and in every in every business that in the country?
Yeah, it really is. And I mean, that's why. So I started with this big defense contractor and then quickly realized there's other businesses that need this. And so I started going to some conferences and stuff like that. And that's how I fell into with a couple of lawyers at a very large law firm. They specialize in insurance. And I roomed with two attorneys in grad school when I was at Penn State. So I saw the lack of financial education that they receive, and they'll fully admit it. I mean, when I was an investment banker, I worked on a deal team, and we had a couple of attorneys, and I had to keep explaining to them what EBITDA was, over and over, because they know contracts, they know law, and all that fun stuff. They know how to grease the wheels, so to speak, to make sure the deals go through and whatnot. But as far as the financial terms or how their clients make money, they learn it on the job, if at all. And I literally just got an email this morning from a student of mine, a former student of mine, an MBA student. He was a sales rep. He works in the fire industry, if you will, fire and security industry. And he said, he goes, until you showed me what you showed me, he goes, I could not get a project approved that I wanted to, get funding for. And he goes, after you showed me what you showed me, he goes, they promoted me to regional VP. And he said, I all of a sudden started getting all kinds of projects approved for, $25 million orders and all this other stuff. And he's knocking the cover off the ball now. Um, and it's just getting a basic understanding of how to read these financial statements, analyze them, and then figuring out, well, what are my competitors doing? What are my customers doing? And can I speak that language of business to my internal and external customers, for lack of a better word?
But how do you teach this to the guy on the floor who looks at a piece of titanium and
So
says, "I don't. Yeah, let's just throw it away."
So the timing of your question is very, very interesting because I have a pilot coming up with a very large private equity firm where that's exactly what they want. It's exactly what they want. And I told them, I said, simple. I said, you have to make people understand the why. And what I mean by that is they need to understand that they add value to the organization, right? They need to understand how they add value to the organization. And this is something that most people miss. And so it's relatively easy for me to walk into any business, ask the people, "What do you do?" And they tell me what they do, and I say, "Okay, this is how you impact the financial statements, or this is how you drive value for the organization." I grew up central New Jersey, pharmaceutical capital of the world. We all worked at Johnson and Johnson. It goes back to my grandfather. It was mostly my father and his brother, my uncle. So my father was in supply chain, my uncle was HR. And they always complained about culture and how people don't understand, their worth and this and that. And my father being in supply chain, he always said for years, like, I just feel like a cog in the system. And as I got older and got into business for myself and everything else, I told him, I said, you know something, Dad, if you were just a cog in the system, they would have fired you by now because you don't add any value for the organization.
Mhm.
So to me, that's kind of the secret is once you show people where they add value, it it all clicks. Culture clicks, attrition goes down, everything. So a real example, the defense contractor that I'm referencing to, which I can't name obviously due to my contracts. There's a gentleman there who's retired now, but he's out in Connecticut, and he said, he goes, my father worked here 35 years as an engineer. I worked here 36 years. Now my two sons work here. And he said, so let's say 71 years of collective experience. And until you showed me what you showed me, I never knew that this is what my job really did. Like he goes, I knew I was an engineer. I knew I was a safety inspector and all this other stuff. Like he would go out to the crash sites and figure out,
Mhm.
what happened and all that other stuff and make adjustments to products. But he goes, I never really figured out what the heck my value was to the organization. And as soon as they see that, it
Mhm.
clicks, man. It just clicks. And that's
Mhm.
that's not just engineers, that's lawyers, that's HR. In my mind, everybody at the end of the day wants to feel like they add value to the organization. They want to be a part of something.
Mhm.
And I just don't think people do a good job of explaining that.
No, yeah, it's really funny. Yeah, but I think it's a couple different things. Is that it's real easy. Yeah, so I worked for, well, I'll just say the OEM. It was Bombardier. And because I don't work there anymore, and I'll tell
Yeah, yeah, right,
I can
right.
talk. I'll talk about it, right? And the deal was at Bombardier on the aircraft on the business jet sales side, there was so much a salesperson could give away on a deal,
Mhm,
no questions asked.
mhm.
But what they didn't give away, so let's just say it was $1 million.
Yeah.
It was more than, let's just say for $1 million. And the thing was is that they were incentivized to not give it away.
Yeah.
So if you have $1 million, if you have $1 million to give away to a customer on a deal, but what you don't give away, you get to keep X amount of. So you could actually, make a pretty darn good commission
Yep.
by not giving away
Yep.
a lot of margin. So now you've got somebody who's incentivized to look after the company's best interests.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I looked at, like Walmart. I was watching this thing on Walmart, and they brought everybody into, this big auditorium, and they were talking about, just like stupid things, like, if you give, this is rope. If we sell rope for, $3 a foot, and you give away a foot and a quarter, it's X much. This is what it costs Walmart.
Mm.
I'm like, yeah, but that's all well and good, but the person's not incentivized to give away. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. And I think that's in a lot of ways, that's where people start to miss the mark. A $25 an hour employee is a $25 an hour employee,
Yep.
or a $30 an hour, a $100,000, whatever. How do you change the mindset in management to get the employees vested?
And to me, that's where the education comes in. You got to be able to come in and show them, guys, look, when you do X, when you do Y, this is how it drives value for the organization. This is how it changes the financial picture. But it's more than just telling them, okay, this is where it shows up on an income statement. I mean, they're not going to care about that,
Mhm.
but that's part of it. I would say that's 30-40% of it. Then after that, after you show them, you say, okay, and this is why this matters for your role. And that to me is part of the specialty. Like when I do this with engineers, first question I ask them is, do you care what happens to your stock price? And they'll, nah, no, we don't care about that, blah, blah, blah. But then I start walking them through how their CFO looks at it and how banks look at it and how shareholders look at it. And I say, well, something, guys, when you go make a proposal for, whatever, a missile or jet engine, whatever it is, the access control solutions, which is a fancy word for security doors. If you go to the airport, so one of my clients, they make the doors that you walk through, right? When you do
Mhm.
your ticketing and all that stuff. And there's one company globally that like really has that market. And that's what they do. But you want to make a new product. It's going to cost $10 million. So the engineer goes to the CFO and says, hey, give me $10 million. We got this cool technology.
Mhm.
And you say, okay, but we can't sell that at a reasonable price point to make a profit. And the engineer is like, well, somebody else figure that out. What they don't realize is that if I give them the money and they don't generate an adequate return, then the next time they come to me for money, the bar goes up.
Mhm.
And so when I tell them, hey, remember on that past deal, you asked for $10 million, and I told you we better make $1 million profit, but we didn't. We only made 800,000. Well, on the next deal, I need 1.2 or 1.3 million in profit because I got to make up for the money we lost last time. And when they get that, it starts to click because they realize, oh, I'm taxing myself by not doing this
Mhm.
correctly. And there it is. And I tell them, now you understand why this matters because it impacts your day to day.
Mhm.
Because if you fall short on one project, I need you to make it up on another.
Yep. I tell you, so there's a couple things and then I'm gonna hit you up on some questions.
Yeah.
Uh, This is a great point for transitioning military people because Yeah, I talked to so many of them, and they're like, "Well, I ran a budget." Well, that's great. I'm glad you ran a budget, but nobody cared. You
Mhm.
know, nobody cared. And there's a big difference in, when I was flying Hawkeyes in the Navy, we dumped 3,000 pounds of fuel to make to be able to come aboard the carrier. And you never thought about 3,000 pounds of fuel. It's 600 gallons at $4 a gallon. It's just 2,400 bucks
Yeah.
wasted.
Yeah.
You never think about it, and that comes into the mindset.
Yep. Yep. Just throwing it away. Oh, I'll tell you, I used to do a thing. So in 1999, I was 17. I worked for my father at Johnson and Johnson, and that was when I first learned the importance of research and development, or R&D budgets. Because all I was doing was helping scientists clean their beakers and all that
Mhm.
fun stuff. And some of these suckers were, $60,000 beakers, and this is in 1999. And so at the end of the quarter, we'd get these shipments coming in. And I'd go to the scientists and say, like, okay, where do you want this stuff? And they would say, hey, go talk to Big Mike on the loading dock. He knows what to do. And they'd kind of chuckle. So long story short, I went down to Big Mike and I said, hey, Mike, like, what am I supposed to do with this? Like John or whatever, right? Up in research. He doesn't want this stuff. Yeah. Long story short, we would end up breaking physically all of that stuff. We would just take like big metal rods to smash all this stuff, and we would smash probably hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of material. And I would say, why don't we just do that? And my father just said, he goes, well, the research budgets are use it or lose it.
Yeah.
And I use that story at almost every client I go to, and they all just start nodding.
Yeah.
Use it or lose it. They're not all breaking things, but it's just use it or lose it. And people need to understand that, some of the why behind this. And it's like, well, if we don't spend the money this year, we're not going to get the same amount next year.
It's
Um,
it's it's so pervasive. I mean, it's pervasive. But you take a small business, big publicly traded company with $1 billion budgets, like nobody cares. Yeah, just go break it, throw it away. We got excess inventory. Go take it to the dump. If you're Louis Vuitton, just burn it because we don't want to hit the. And you're like, wait a second here. But if you're a small business, it's like, wait a
yeah,
second. Yeah, every dollar. It's a totally different. It's a
it
totally different.
counts. It counts.
What's the process? I mean, so walk through walk through the training. Who do you start with, and what's the big aha moment? Where do they get the big
Yeah.
aha moment?
I mean, it varies, right? So, like I said, I started with defense with engineers. Then they moved it to operations. Then they moved it to early development programs. And so I do all kinds for them now. But then I shifted over into banks and law firms because again, it's everywhere. So for banks, it's a lot of operations personnel, because when you get there, then it's okay. They understand how to make the widget cheaper, but again, they don't necessarily understand the why. And so there's always this fight when they're
Mhm.
going to ask for money, or why are we doing it this way? And my favorite answer, because we've always done it that way, and it's like, well, God knows if that's the right answer, right? But usually it's about usually like a 2-day program. Let's say I've done as long as 3 or 4, depending on what they want, because it's always tailored. So it's tailored to the company, it's tailored to the industry, just depends on what they want me to cover. But the first day is relatively high level. It's okay. Let's go through the financial statements. Let's go through the income statement, balance sheet, cash flows, because we need to lay the foundation.
Mhm.
We need to lay the foundation of getting the fundamental terminology, that language of business, that accounting and finance. It's not debits and credits. It's anything, nothing like that. But it always amazes me how many people have P&L responsibility, profit and loss responsibility, and they've never been told how to read one of these statements. And so it's like, well, your bonus is based off of operating income, and nobody's ever showed you what that even is. So now you're making decisions to hopefully impact operating income, but you have no idea what that is, or whether or not the decisions you're making are going to increase it, decrease it. So first, it's walk them through the financial statements, get them comfortable reading them and speaking that language. The second day is a lot more about, okay, now let's talk about the common metrics that are relevant for your company and your industry. Because obviously the metrics in banking are going to be different than they are for an aerospace company, or even an insurance company, or things like that. They're all different.
Mhm.
Then within that, sometimes the companies have their own measures. So some companies like return on invested capital. Other companies just focus on sort of a profitability measure like EBITDA margin, things like that. So we'll talk about that. And then it's okay. Now, how do you request money from your CFO when you need to build a new building, add capacity to your manufacturing line, build a new jet engine, whatever the heck it is. And
Mhm.
there are things that they need to know for how to put that proposal together. So my favorite is one of my companies, and this is on my website, but it flat out says I did a survey with them, and they said, on average, we work on three proposals a year, 1 to 6. So I took an average of three, and I said, okay, how many hours did it save you after doing what I showed you? And they said 10 to 20 hours per proposal per person. And I said, okay, let's do 15. Let's do 15 hours. Let's split it down the middle. So if you figure an engineer works on three proposals a year, 15 hours saved, that's 45 hours. That's a week. That's a week's worth of work saved from arguing with the finance team and trying to figure out how to put the proposal together and all that garbage. Um, and you could put a dollar value on that. I definitely can't tell you what the average bill rate is for that because that's very proprietary, but you can figure it out
It's
and
a
write it.
couple $100 an hour. I would just figure, yeah, engineer, fully burdened. Yeah, two
And
hundred
if
bucks an
it's
hour.
and if it's a company like Google that pays their engineers really well, it's
Mhm.
even higher. Which the fact that I mentioned Google shows you they're not a client because I wouldn't have mentioned them otherwise.
Mhm.
But it's just you figure it out. And I mean, in some cases, this is millions of dollars. And when I tell people like, well, look, I'm going to charge you this, but I'm going to save you that just from one activity, it's like then the ROI on me is
Mhm.
no brainer.
So you're walking through the people through the balance sheets, income statements. You're getting a general manager who really is never, or yeah, director of operations,
Yeah.
comfortable and understanding.
A lot of these folks are, believe it or not, they are one step away from the C-suite on down, all the way to entry level employees. Believe it or not, I've trained a couple of chief operating officers because it's always funny to me. The CFOs obviously know this stuff. The CEOs and the COOs, the chief operating officers, not necessarily, not if they don't have a finance background. And a lot of COOs, they come from operations, they come from supply chain. CEOs come from sales or marketing. So they might have heard these terms, but they're not necessarily that equipped.
Yeah, I could talk about a couple CEOs who they struggle at earnings calls. When it comes to earnings calls, they struggle a little bit.
I
And
I won't say the firms, but I have two firms that are clients that one of them is private equity, one of them is not, and they're CFOs. Now these are big companies. These are Fortune 100s. Well, the one and the PE firm, the operating executive I talk with there, he's a former Fortune 100 CFO twice. And they both asked me, they said, why do you call it finance for non-finance people? And I said, well, I didn't want to be presumptuous. And they both said the same thing. Our FP&A teams or financial planning and analysis, they're like, they don't know this stuff because they've always been private. And so they've never had to work with Wall Street analysts and all that fun stuff. And so once you become public, different game. It's still the same fundamentals, but now there's a different audience that speaks a different way. And so what I always tell people is when you go to college, you're taught corporate finance. You're not taught Wall Street finance, and those are two different things, two different viewpoints. And so even on the finance side, there's people that I've trained just because it's like, well, you've never been public before. You don't know what the sell side analysts and the hedge fund managers, you don't know what they're looking for.
Mhm.
And so it just comes into play. Just depends on the prism, so to speak, we're looking at.
but but as a basic employee, salesperson, sales
Mhm.
VP,
Mhm.
director of operations, you're wanting to further your education, or you really, you just want to start reading some books. A lot of people go out
Yeah.
and read, sales books, or what do they need to know from the finance side? What are just some easy concepts from the finance side that
Yep.
they need to go brush up on just to get you for that aha moment?
The two big ones first, start with the income statement and learn what profitability is. And I don't mean how much net income. It's always a function of okay, what are our margins? How many pennies per dollar of sale are we keeping? Right. So if you think about like Walmart, when Walmart sells a good, by the time they pay all the expenses, and I mean all of them, they're maybe keeping 3 pennies per dollar of sale. Now that sounds lousy. They have a 3% net margin, profit margin, but they make up for it in volume. So when you understand profitability analysis, now you can start to compare to your competitors and you say, okay, they're higher than we are. Why is that? Is it because They can charge higher prices, or they're just selling a different product that we don't necessarily sell. And so sometimes it's just as simple as, okay, they're higher than us, but we don't have to worry about it. Other times they're higher than us, it's because our manufacturing stinks. Then profitability's fine, but we learned this through Enron. Enron had beautiful income statements. Their revenue went up every year, income went up every year, their profitability went up every year, but they didn't make any actual money. And so that's where the balance sheet and statement of cash flows comes into play, because you need the income statement and balance sheet to make the statement of cash flows. They kind of flow through one
Mhm.
another. So you can have, like Enron, great income, but no actual cash. And so then they have to understand, okay, our sales teams are out there making all these sales, but we're not actually collecting from the customer. So whose fault is that? And what can we do to improve it? Because if we're not generating any cash, you're dying, right? Cash is essentially oxygen to a business. Net income is nice, but if we don't have cash flow coming in, we can't breathe. And so they need to make that link. So it's funny you mentioned sales teams, because I've trained quite a few of them. They're always about generate the sale and move on. And I'm sitting there thinking, yeah, but are we getting paid? So when you think about Berkshire Hathaway, Warren Buffett's company, they will flat out say on the insurance side, we will not underwrite the contract if we know we're going to lose money ultimately, right? Because they know they're just giving more money out than they're taking in. And in insurance, I mean, Buffett's been writing about this since the 70s. It's amazing how many companies ignore that. And they say, well, we won't have to make the payments for 10 years. In the meantime, we'll be okay. Yeah, that's true until there's major catastrophes like 2 or 3 hurricanes in a year, and all of a sudden the losses balloon. And it's like, yeah, you thought those losses were going to roll in kind of evenly over time. And then one year you get a major catastrophe like a Katrina, and half the, and like, 20% of the industry goes bankrupt.
We can talk about, yeah, you can talk about, it's Berkshire Hathaway. They've got their, NetJets is one of the portfolio companies. And the
Yeah.
Great Recession came, back in 2008, 9, 10, and into 11. And they had to pump billions into it because, their contracts were written such that, hey, look, I'll just sell you, I'll sell my thing back to you at fair market value
Yep.
and walk away. Well, it, it might have been a once in a century flood, but it's still a flood that happens.
But when it comes, man, that's why Buffett always says we have an ironclad balance sheet, because we can withstand just about any catastrophe, because they happen.
But this is, it's a lot of ways, you can't really look. I wish companies would teach their salespeople better. And
Mhm.
and the great. I remember talking to a guy. He's like, "Yeah, I flew to Singapore, and I get to Singapore, and I find out that there's 5 other teammates in Singapore, and I'm like,
Mhm.
what are you doing here?" And they're like, "Oh, we're here to support you." Oh, okay. Well, where are you guys staying? Oh, we're at the Peninsula. How'd you get here? Business class, Singapore Airlines.
Yep.
So now they're into this deal. They're already into this deal for a couple hundred grand,
Yeah.
and yeah, there you go. And it's this whole team that has no idea. Like, hey, wait a minute. Yeah, we're digging ourselves out of a $250,000 hole just from this trip alone.
This is an interesting point that you're making, and especially given the nature of this podcast. This brings me to something. So estimates at completion, right? Huge within the industry. And so, obviously we're working on a project far out into the future. It's fixed price or whatever it is, because that's obviously where the government's trying to push everything with the contractors.
Mm.
And we say, okay, this thing will be $300 million, and we'll make 15% on that. Whatever, we'll make $45 million profit. Before you know it, the total cost of that project is 330 million. So you've undershot your costs by 30 million, which by definition means your $45 million profit is now only 15 million.
Mhm.
This is a huge, huge problem within the industry that a couple of these firms have asked me to help fix. And where I'm going with this is, it's interesting because when I think about your example, going out to the Philippines and you're into a couple hundred grand, it's a cost allocation problem. In some cases, it quite literally is people don't understand the costs that need to be included into all of this. And so the cost estimates are incorrect. So it's similar to your sales team example, to where they might be saying, yeah, but we went out there and sold, $1 million worth and blah, 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 and the travel is separate. And it's like, well, no, because we wouldn't have incurred the travel if you didn't go out there.
It's
So it
it's a
needs to be lumped in.
it's a pot of money. It's a pot of money,
Yep.
and it all comes. Do companies need to reevaluate? Yeah, how every employee is. I mean, obviously, in big companies it gets hard, but do they need to
Yeah.
evaluate how employees are compensated? And the reason I'm asking is like, there's great story. I think KKR is the KKR bought a window manufacturer,
Yeah.
and
Yep.
they explain to every employee how you are now vested. Our success will be your success.
Yep.
Does every company need to do that?
This is where this gets tricky. I mean, if you're a public company, it's going to be very hard to do that just because you're going to dilute your current shareholders. And so there's no hard and fast rule on this, but if a lot of public companies started giving their employees mountains of stock, like KKR did with its CHI overhead doors, I know the case really well.
Mhm.
They were always private. The dilution could be significant to the point where shareholders might balk at that and have an uprising just because, you're basically saying, hey, I used to own 80% of this pizza and now I own 40% of this pizza. I mean, that's going to be a hard pill for shareholders to swallow. Where KKR was really successful with it, and I've spoken to them about this, and I've spoken to the former CEO of CHI Overhead Doors when they went through this. Um, the theory there is from KKR is that there's a lot of benefit to ensuring that the employees, not just the private equity principals, go along for the ride. And I agree with that because obviously it is the employees who are helping make the company successful, and it's their blood, sweat, and tears, especially a lot of those frontline workers. And so KKR saw that. They piloted it with CHI overhead doors. And to this day, KKR says, look, this was kind of the poster child for this. And it was still one of our, if not their most successful investment. And so they've been doing this with most of their portfolio companies. The concept is called ownership works. And so they do it. I think TPG does it and Leonard Green also does it. And so the industry is like slowly catching on. Because one of the other problems they've pointed out is, it can't just be private equity making all the money because then there's that wealth gap that keeps growing. So let's have the employees come along with us. But the beauty part is when you incentivize the employees properly, they make the right decisions, which takes, let's say, your cash flow from 100 million to 125 million. Well, if you're selling this thing for a 10 times multiple, you just created an additional 25 million of cash flow. Stick a 10 times multiple on that. You just created $250 million additional on the sales price. So
Mhm.
everybody wins.
But
And
it's
the employees again understand how they drive value for the organization. They feel like they're a part of something. They actually have, I think on YouTube, there's actually videos from KKR and Ownership Works interviewing employees who have gone through it and how much they loved it and all that other stuff.
Yeah, no, look, I just like the concept because the ultimate goal is you want
Yeah,
marginal cost equals marginal return. You want marginal income. Yeah, when
yep,
you want your employees to help, just so our mutual interests are aligned. We make
correct,
some money, you guys make some money.
correct.
And I think this is where a lot of, we'll get into the politics of business a little bit, but this is where a lot of the criticism of income disparity are. It's, well, CEOs and equity investors are getting paid a bunch and, employees are kind of hanging out there. But when, I just
Right.
love the concept of bringing them along and, you know, equity or cash bonuses, for that
Oh yeah.
margin, for marginal improvements, in the business.
To,
Um,
m- to to me, it makes all the sense in the world. I mean, again, for a public company, you got to be careful because if a public company were to just institute this, it could get challenging just from a dilution standpoint because there already are shares out there. But there's ways to figure it out.
yeah. But the thing is, you got to educate your employees on what marginal improvement looks like.
And see, you're touching right on it because to me, you can give people shares, but that doesn't mean that they know what decisions to make.
Right.
Case in point, it's like, okay, maybe there's 10 good decisions they can make. They know that they know of 5 of them just because they do their jobs day in and day out, but they're not incentivized to do it. So now we give them shares and they go make those 5 good decisions and value goes up. But you still left money on the table because there were 5 other decisions they could have made that they never would have thought of because they don't know how the financial statements work and they don't know how by doing this instead of that, they could have increased their cash flow and all that. And so that's where I try to come in and help with that.
So what's the easiest way? You talked about balance sheet, your balance sheet,
Income statement, cash flows. Yeah.
balance sheet, income statement, cash flow, basically, understanding how it all flows. Is
Yep.
there 2 or 3 other ways? I mean, you bring 100 people in to a room, 80 of which probably don't even know what balance sheet, income statement,
Right.
even, like, what's that? They don't even
Right.
know what it is. Yeah.
Yep.
What's the aha moment? At what point do they get the aha moment and say,
Oh, honest. Every time I do it, and I've been doing it for 4 years, they get it on day one. They get it on day one because what I will literally do is I'll walk them through the P&L first because you get cut always have to start there. Because like income statement flows into the balance sheet and both of those flow into cash flows. And then I'll start asking them, what's your job? And they tell me what their job is. And I say, okay, give me a task that you do. And they'll give it to me. And I say, here's why that matters. And you go from there. Now, the cool part is for the smart companies, they won't just have a bunch of engineers in the room. They'll have engineers and supply chain and this and that. You mix it across function. And then these people start talking to each other. And what you realize is that, okay, engineering is ticked off at supply chain for this reason. Supply chain is ticked off at engineering for that reason. But now they start to hash it out because they realize, oh, engineering, when you do this, you would help me here, and that'll drive production this way. And then engineering says, right. And ops or supply chain, using those interchangeably. When you guys do this, this is how you help us. And it increases the speed from which we go from development to production. And production's where everybody wants to be because then you're actually moving product out the door. And they start coming together. And to me, that's the secret. Because most functions, right? It doesn't matter what it is, marketing and sales and R&D, they're siloed at most big organizations. What we need to do is get them to work together. It's got to be this one culture focus. You hear CEOs all the time talk about a culture of continuous improvement. There is no way you're going to do that unless you get everybody on the same page.
Yeah.
And so the analogy I always use is the boys in the boat. For anyone who's seen the movie, I haven't read the book. I watched the movie, but maybe they've read the book. So it's about the 1936 crew team. They were out of the University of Washington. They won the gold medal. So sorry for the spoiler alert. But they go to the Olympics. They win the gold medal. And when I'm watching the movie and I'm looking at this crew team, I'm like, damn, that's a company. The boat is the company. Each person in the boat is a department, right? You got R&D, sales, all that. And the oars are the people. Now, again, not being a person who's ever rowed crew, but I mean, this isn't hard to figure out. The oars go in the water at the exact same time. They move through the water with the exact same force. They come out at the exact same time. Then they all turn them. So they move through the air aerodynamically and turn them again, go right back into the water. The point is, just like a company, every division, every employee is working in lockstep towards a common goal. And I always like to joke and say, and the guy at the back of the boat yelling at everyone to go faster, that's the CEO. But they're all on the same page. They know what their goal is. They know what their role is. They know what their assignment is. And they understand the why. Companies don't do that. As a football guy, an American football guy, I always tell my clients, think of if you had a football team and only your quarterback knew the playbook. Nobody knows who to block or why. Nobody knows which route to run or why. And then when the quarterback calls an audible, nobody knows what to do. You're not going from the 20-yard line 80 yards down the field into the end zone that way. But if everyone understands the playbook and speaks the same language and understands why what they do matters on each and every play, you start clicking.
It's basically it's business 101. And unfortunately, average Joe is not taught business 101. They're taught come to work, get their paycheck,
Correct.
go home, spend paycheck. They
Correct.
understand their family finances.
Yeah.
And you think about like just such a simple, let's teach these people basic business. And not only for our business, but for their own lives. And eventually when they move on, they have a knowledge, a skill that is worth it. For all the organizations you've done, you've been doing this a while. For all the organizations, they come back to you and said, "Hey, we've been able to measurably, you know,
Yep.
division." What kind of benefit do they see from investment in teaching their employees the tenets of finance?
Yep.
What kind of upside do they see from there?
It's so the monetary ones when we've identified them, like I said, think of the engineering example with just saving the number of hours. Now, you save somebody a week a year, right? 50 work weeks a year, let's say. You save somebody 1 week just in one task. You've de-stressed their lives a little bit because now I don't have to go argue. I don't have to spend a week of my life arguing with finance about why I need this amount of money and all that fun stuff. So there's that. Um, Companies have told me they measure this internally. They won't tell me, but attrition goes down because now these people understand why their role matters and how they can do their jobs more effectively. And so to them, it's okay, here's how I add value to the organization. I'm a better employee. I have better conversations because I can speak the language with my
Mhm.
superiors, all that fun stuff. Um, then the fun part is the way I describe this. In my mind, we're enhancing organizational trust and culture. And this goes back to the football analogy. If everyone's speaking the same language and they know why they do what they do on each play matters and why they have to do it, well, now we trust each other. The quarterback is going to trust his offensive line to block for him because he knows that they know their assignments and what they need to do. Once you do that, you can align on a purpose. Once you speak the same language and trust one another, you can align on a purpose because you can communicate
Mhm.
effectively with each other. And once you align on a purpose, we need to go 80 yards to that end zone. Now you develop a culture of continuous improvement because everyone understands what the goal is and how they help. So you get a culture of continuous improvement. And this creates, in my mind, this flywheel. And I have a slide on this on my website that talks through it. There's a flywheel effect. And once you do that, you become very efficient because as some of my clients tell me, we're now spotting inefficiencies and trying to fix them. So by
Mhm.
definition, you're becoming more efficient. Well, if you do that, you're going to increase firm value because stock prices, if Warren Buffett and one of my idols, Peter Lynch, who used to be the fund manager at Fidelity Magellan in the
Mhm.
80s, said, over the long term, stock prices will follow company performance, particularly earnings and cash flow. So if
Mhm.
you teach people how they impact that and do better, your stock price is going to follow. Whether you have a stock price or not, let's say you're private, fine, your private valuation will follow.
It's
And to
amazing.
your point, and to your point, give the employees some ownership so they benefit from that.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I love it. And from like I'm a big believer. I tell people all the time, especially young kids, if you're not willing to invest in yourself, nobody else will invest in you either, and nobody should. So
Yep.
if you want to invest in one good idea, it's go invest in learning the basic tenets of finance
Yep.
for the long haul.
Yep.
And and it's really funny. A guy, a good friend of mine, and Rob, his name's Rob Houghton, and Rob used to do a lot of podcasts with me. He's ex, I want to say Ernst and Young, Price Waterhouse,
Mhm.
one of the big four,
Yeah.
and he's semi-retired now. But we used to pick stocks and a little bit of day trading here. And Rob, understanding the accounting mindset, built a portfolio to him that consistently in any market pays double-digit returns, and he sleeps well at night.
Mhm.
And it's like, yeah, here's how I look at it. Just yeah. So the basic understanding the basic tenets of finance and business. Yeah, there's definitely an upside. The upside is immense, and it's shocking how few people really understand it.
It's working for KKR. I mean, they're very public about what they do with ownership works. And you hit on a point earlier when you said, like, what's the aha moment? This is where KKR, I think, was brilliant. Um, while they don't necessarily teach people the financial concepts that I do, what they do after they give people shares, and everybody gets shares, everybody. They'll bring in financial advisors to help these folks understand, look, when we sell, you might make $200,000, and someone making $15 an hour, that's a big pile of money. And so don't go out and buy a Camaro with that money. Like, here's how you can set yourself up for your retirement or for your kids' college or whatever it is. And so the point is, I tend to do something similar. So when you ask me what the aha moment is, I'm not going to tell you what it is because it's part of the secret sauce. But very early in the presentation, when I do it, I'll say, guys, this concept here that I'm teaching you from the corporate side is the same concept that you're trying to do with your retirement. Do you see the similarities? And that's when they say, oh, that's what we're trying to do. And I said, you got it? And they say, yeah. And it's very early. It's usually within like the first hour of the first day. And at that point I have them.
Yeah.
And they're with me. And I just keep going back to that. And it's like, yeah, we get it. And I mean, we talked previously, right, about, some of the testimonials and whatnot. It's there. It's in writing.
Make them show, again, understand what's in it. Make them understand what's in it for them, and you'll have them for life.
Pretty much. Pretty
That's
much. And at that point, it's just they go to work feeling differently than they did before they met me.
I love it. How do folks get a hold of you, Kevin?
Easy. So my website is www.caecoach.org. So key as in cat, A as in alpha, E as in echo. caecoach.org. And my email's on there, my phone number's on there, but it's kevin.koharki, KOHARKI at caecoach.org. Nobody spells my name right, so maybe when we do the edits, we can
We'll get it. We'll get it in the show notes.
But no,
Kevin,
real easy. Everything's on there, and always happy to talk.
we'll get it in the show notes. Thanks for coming on, Kevin. Appreciate the time.
No, I really appreciate it, Craig. It's been truly my pleasure. Thanks for having me.